And welcome again to Theories of Reality. I'm Professor Borrowdale, and we're going to finish talking about the mind-body problem today. And actually, no, we have a little bit. So we'll talk some more about the mind-body problem, and then we'll actually finish on Thursday. And I think today we'll get into some questions of artificial intelligence. But we'll wrap up our discussion of dualism versus materialism, and then start thinking about how the mind-body problem and artificial intelligence work, and look at the functionalist criteria for consciousness. Is there anyone that hasn't signed the TV release form who's here today? Video release form. Okay. Sure. All right. Let's look at. Let's see. Class here. Last time we were talking about the debate between dualism and materialism. I was giving you, I gave you 4 separate arguments in favor of materialism and against dualism. So let's talk about those. Let's see. Oh, just a reminder, there's a club fair going on tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday, the 23rd and 24th. Actually, the club fair is part of like the big sort of, I don't know what they call it, like Resource Day or something like that. They have representatives from like all sorts of campus resources, financial aid, counseling, and then like all the clubs on campus. So anything, all the resources on campus, they have tables set up, free stuff, free food, giveaways, and information where you can actually talk to somebody in one of the clubs on campus. Young Americans for Liberty will be there. I'll be there. So if you want to stop by and say hi, we'll be doing the world's smallest political quiz. And you can see where you fall on the political spectrum. We'll be giving away cryptocurrency, and you download. If you're wondering about what crypto is all about, you can download it to your phone and get like a little bit of Bitcoin. I'm not sure what Travis might be offering, but he'll be there for a short period of time doing that. And lots of there's tons of clubs on campus. There's the fencing club, there's the anime and manga club, there's what do they have, there's a film club, a disc golf club, all kinds of stuff. So whatever you're into, there's probably a club that fits your interest, or you can start one, and those people will be at the resource day as well. And then on Thursday, it's going to be just like a club fair over in the Hoagland Commons, as they call it. It's all on the 2nd floor of the center building. So 10 to 2 tomorrow, Wednesday, and then 11 to 2, just the clubs on Thursday. 2nd floor of the center building. All right. Announcements. So I think. Let's go back one more. And my mind body. Nope. Oh, wait. There it is. Let's get to where we were. Let's try that again. This is where we were. So thoughts on these arguments. So I think I hit all of these. So why is it? So the first argument is about this idea of vitalism, that there's a vital force responsible for life, and it's kind of like a pre-scientific view about what makes a living thing alive. And it turns out that it's something much more, I suppose, mundane, pedestrian, is ATP, and it's it's mitochondria, and it's chemical reactions which turn the food you eat into energy. And now we understand those processes, and nobody believes in the vital force anymore. We understand that it's all electrochemical processes, apart from some pseudoscientific theories you might hear on late night radio, or perhaps some religious views that people have about the nature of life. But we can explain life in terms of electrochemical processes going on in the body, and particularly with molecular biology. We know how the body metabolizes and breaks down food, organic matter, and breaks it down to glucose and uses it for energy. So there's no ethereal energy that makes you alive. It's just your body's taking food and converting it to glucose and using that for energy, to fuel your brain, to fuel to make your heart beat, to make your lungs inflate. So all those things are based on chemical energy from the food you eat. And so vitalism is gone now. So the question is the soul going in the same direction? Once we understand the way the brain creates consciousness, will we junk the idea of the soul as a pre-scientific sort of medieval belief that and throw it into the dustbin of history, along with concepts like phlogiston? And phlogiston's actually a good analogy. So it's PHLOGISTON. Anybody know what phlogiston is? Probably, if you're taking a class in chemistry, that you were not introduced to phlogiston, except for by way of maybe example. If you look at the periodic table, the element of phlogiston is nowhere to be found. So what is phlogiston? Well, phlogiston was this concept that medieval scientists, natural philosophers came up with to try to explain combustion. So if you take a piece of wood and you put kindling under it and you light it on fire and it burns down to ash. You take a log of a similar size and shape, and you take the ash and you put them on a scale, and the ash is a lot lighter than the log. And the question is, why is that? What's going on when you burn something? What's happening? And so the theory was that phlogiston was this element which existed in the atmosphere, and that when you lit a fire, the phlogiston was drawn into the wood and blended with the wood, such that as the wood combusted, it lost weight, because phlogiston has negative weight. So the reason the ashes weigh less is because phlogiston is an element with negative weight, and it's merging with the log in order to create ash, right? So turns out it's way off from the real. Anybody know what the real theory is? Why the ashes weigh less than the piece of wood, the log? In combustion, what happens is that you have I suppose a chemist or a physicist could give you a detailed explanation. But in combustion, you're freeing the carbon from its bonds with the oxygen. So you have carbon mixed in with all these other elements, and the combustion is a chemical reaction that frees the oxygen from and other elements from the log. So basically, you're left with just carbon. And so ash is mostly pile of carbon you have there. It breaks down the cellular and molecular structure of organic matter and frees the oxygen and gives you carbon. So burning is basically rapid oxidation. So that's the real story. And the reason it weighs less is because you're breaking down the chemical bonds and of the thing. And so what you have as a result is just the carbon. You've broken down the bonds and freed the oxygen from the chemical bonds. And so that's basically combustion is a process where you're breaking down chemical bonds, and there's no phlogiston. right? And so we understand how combustion works today, and that's probably a mangled explanation of it, of the actual chemical process.
So I looked up if negative mass is actually a thing in Washington State University. The physics lab made a fluid that has negative mass. And so whenever
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So do they call it phlogiston?
No, they don't.
But that's the idea that there exists this ubiquitous substance called phlogiston with negative weight, which explains why when you burn something, the ashes weigh less than the thing you burned. It's a primitive, wrong theory of combustion, and nobody believes it anymore because we understand how it really works, right? So, and and notice this is like it's a hypothesis, right? Nobody was ever able to measure phlogiston directly, but they hypothesized it based on these indirect effects. And it's very similar to the soul, right? You can't see a soul, can't taste it or smell it or touch it. But it's thought that a soul is necessary to explain certain things like higher level consciousness, like what this idea that we have thoughts and beliefs which are different from material reality, that to explain the nature of consciousness. But if we can explain the nature of consciousness through, say, cognitive science or understanding neuroscience, in the same way we explain combustion through chemical processes, then we can junk this idea of the soul or the idea of phlogiston or some of these other ideas. Like Aristotle would observe like frogs coming out of the mud every springtime. And so in one of his big, fails, epic philosophical fail, epic scientific fail, one of the most, this is like worst cold fusion is like one of the worst scientific fails of all time. He said, well, it's spontaneous generation, that frogs just sort of are randomly produced from mud. Now, can anyone guess what the real story is? Like, why do frogs come out of the mud?
There's eggs down
Yeah, the frogs lay their eggs in the mud, and then the eggs hatch, and the frogs come out. But give Aristotle a break. He's a smart guy, but even smart people come up with stupid theories every once in a while, and get sloppy. So then you think about the concept of the soul. It's a really ancient idea of this kind of ghostly mini-me that inhabits your body. It was before people even understood that consciousness resided in the brain at all, or that the brain was important to consciousness. People would sometimes locate consciousness in the heart. So you get like these idioms in, say, Hebrew, about a person saying in their heart something, right? That's because it's in your heart. Sometimes they would think it was like, I think the Egyptians thought the consciousness was in your liver, right? These are pre-scientific views. So you come in the 20th century, 21st century, and you learn a lot about the way the brain functions, and you learn about how what a neuron is, and how your brain's this complex network of neurons. It's billions of them together, and how these patterns of firings in the wires of your brain are associated with states of consciousness, and particular states of consciousness. You think, oh, I see, it's just the brain creates consciousness. That's the story. This idea of this ethereal, ghostly mini-me is just something we should get rid of, unless there's some independent evidence for it. And then when you look at things like this, cause and effect between damage to your brain and damage to your mind, and we see that people that have particular kinds of brain damage or say brain abnormalities end up with different kinds of consciousness. I think, okay, well that makes it look like it's just the brain too. And then you look at the animal kingdom, and you look at those animals that have super sophisticated nervous systems seem to display behavior which indicates sophisticated kinds of consciousness, and that the really ones with like rudimentary nervous systems have like really rudimentary behaviors, and run on instinct and seem somewhat robotic and incapable of independent thought or sophisticated thought. That seems to be another proof. And then you start thinking about why is it that when you bring somebody back to life, that the soul always seems to come back. It seems really convenient, right? If you believe that consciousness is separate from your body, why is it that every time you get a body working again, the person is conscious? They don't come back as, say, a soulless zombie, right? If you know, as long as there's not brain damage, as long as you get in, say, within 5 minutes, and you get them with you put a shot of adrenaline into their heart, you get them with the defibrillator paddles, and all of a sudden they get the blood to their oxygen, or they get oxygen to their brain again. Their heart starts beating, and there's oxygen in the brain, and they come back and they're walking and talking and saying stuff, and they remember all the things that happened to them, and they can make a full recovery. There's even a case of there's a boy who was dead for, I think it's about 3 hours. He fell into a icy pond and drowned, and it was like in there, and then they sent scuba divers, in skin suits so they didn't freeze to death. They go into the ice, and they found him and dragged him out, took him to the hospital, warmed him up, started his heart again, and today he's good as new. Why did his soul come back, right? He was dead for 3 hours. There's another woman, she had a brain aneurysm, which is a blockage in a vessel in your brain. So what happens is, if you get a blood vessel in your brain blocked, it's sort of like, because it's blocked, it sort of balloons up because the blood can't go, and it just expands, until it pops like a balloon, and that's called a stroke. And it's really, really bad. If it's a little one, you have what's called the mini stroke. If it's a really big one, you might be a goner. You might die. That's what happened to my neighbor, who was high stress, listened to talk radio all day, smoking cigarettes, and loved barbecuing red meat. And he was ready to take his retirement in his RV, and then it was a few nights into his trip, sudden his eyes rolled back in the back of his head, and he died of a hemorrhagic stroke, right? So you have somebody who's got an aneurysm, they get this blocked blood vessel. Well, what do? It's really hard to fix it while the person's alive. So what you do is you kill them, and then you fix the blood. You drain all the blood out of their body. You fix the aneurysm. You put the blood back in, and you come back to life. Nobody thinks about, oh, well, what if their soul doesn't come back? You think, oh, something can go wrong with the operation, anesthesia, the person could die. Sure, there's always risk for surgery. But nobody thinks, okay, well, what if we do it all medically, everything is great, but for some reason their soul doesn't come back, and they come back as a soulless zombie. It's always assumed that if you get the body working again, they come back. And sure enough, this person, I think the operation takes less than an hour. So you're dead for 45 minutes. Again, clinically dead, no heartbeat, no respiration, pupils fixed and dilated, no brain activity. And then, you fix them up, patch them up, start the heart again, and lo and behold, they're alive again. It really seems to kind of poke at this idea that your soul is the seat of consciousness, and that the idea that life is when your soul is in your body, and then when you die, your soul goes someplace else, to a better place or maybe a worse place. So what do you think about these skeptical arguments against dualism and in favor of the materialist view? Any thoughts about them, or what a dualist might say about them? Is some better than others? What do you think? I mean, you could say that, right? So dualists might say, well, it's a law of nature, maybe a law of God, that whenever your body's alive, God sends the soul, back. So God sees, Borrowdale finally had that stroke. He's laying there, but they're working on with the paddles. Oh, looks like he's alive. Better send that soul back, because I don't want him to come back as a soulless zombie. That would be terrible. That scares students.
A dualist would say it's not his time to go. That's it.
Yeah. How would you tell? How would you tell whether I had a soul or not? It's kind of weird. Like, is that what a person in coma is, or? But people in coma, like you can see, they have brain damage or something. There's a reason why they're not.
If you waited
awake.
6 minutes, they hit you with the paddles, and you came back completely you, then I mean maybe. But like the fact that you probably have brain damage, and then like a lot of who you were would be inaccessible to you, like I just think it's just your brain firing off.
Yeah, but then like, whereas like people think about like a person that believes in the soul. Like a soul is an immaterial substance, right? So sometimes people can talk about, you know, even Ayn Rand, who was an atheist, would talk about like spiritual values, but she didn't really mean like spiritual values. She meant like something like moral or you know, aesthetic values or something like that. So sometimes people talk about like, you know, the that heartless administrator has no soul. They cut the philosophy program, right? For example, yeah. But somebody might say, "Oh, Borrowdale, I thought you were an atheist, right?" I'm like, "Well, I didn't mean literally, as like that former President Spillies is a soulless zombie or something. I just meant that you know she has, you know, misplaced priorities or something like that, or is heartless, right? So, but you think about literally like a soul is an immaterial substance which joins with your material body, and the dualist perspective is you're a combination of body and spirit. You have your physical body, which operates according to the laws of cause and effects and you know, physics and basically it's, you know, it's biology, right? And that boils down to chemistry, and that boils down to physics, and it's part of the physical world. But then you have this non-physical, spiritual, immaterial, right, not material substance, which is also part of your nature, which is your soul. And that when you die, at biological death, what happens is the body suffers a catastrophic failure, and then the soul leaves the body and goes to a different place. I mean, this is how most people think about it, right? And so if you're like at a deathbed, you're maybe you have some relative who's sick in the hospital or in advanced years and on their last legs, and there's the death rattle, and the person struggles for breath, or they might just die in their sleep, right? And what do people say? Oh, you know, he's gone, right? He's no longer with us. He's passed on to the other side. But all these arguments here seem to raise questions about that, right? Is that really what's happening, or is it just that the person died, meaning their body just stopped functioning and their brain stopped functioning?
Yeah, they just stopped functioning.
Yeah, so either you're convinced by the materialist argument.
Yeah.
So what's the counter argument? What's the dualist going to say about these?
Because they're like immortal, maybe they're eternal outside of the physical world.
Well, they say there's this soul, but then all these arguments seem to cast out of them, like so if you're, well, so this is one of the things I'll say, is that the brain is an interface between the body and the soul. So when you die, your body gives up, and then your body suffers failure, and your soul, you know, goes off someplace. And you know, why do people come back when you start their body again? I mean, you could just say this, you know, it's a spiritual law, and we observe this. We observe that whenever people come back, their soul seems to come back too, as evidenced by their, you know, regaining consciousness and having memories of things that happened to them and having the same personality and so on. So they might say that, well, of course the person seems like the same person because their soul comes back, because it's a, you know, invariable spiritual law that whenever your body, you're maybe they'd have some sort of pseudo, like I don't know what you call it. They'd say it's a law of nature that your body, you know, attracts your soul, or they could say that, you know, God sets things up so that you know, He sends your soul back when it's not your time. But this interface idea is that consciousness always has to come through your body, because you're an embodied soul. So because you're an embodied soul, there are limitations to how your soul can express itself in the world. So if you have some brain damage, it may be that like when you die, your brain isn't going to be hampered by that. Suppose you have I don't know, you suffer like when people suffer a stroke, sometimes they have a hard time with language. I remember my grandma had a stroke, and she had problems choosing the right word. So she wanted to send a letter, and she, instead of saying the word envelope, she said pillowcase, right? So you think about, okay, that makes sense because of their similar concepts. It's, you know, it's a white thing that you put stuff in, right? So and she had problems, and sometimes people they have problems even speaking because and using language if they have a stroke in that part of their brain that deals with language use. And I think the dualist would say that that's a limitation of the nervous system, but were that person to die and you go up to heaven, they'd have conversations and they wouldn't have any problems communicating. They wouldn't be using words or perhaps even like a human language, but you'd still have communication, conscious communication between, with the heavenly beings or what have you, right? And that, or with God, and that's, and that would be fine. But if you're embodied, you're hampered by this brain and whatever defects it might have or whatever damage it may have suffered. And so it's really, that's not an argument. They would say that any, this sort of seeming cause and effect relationship between brain damage and cognition isn't a direct relationship, but it's that your brain's damaged, and that means your soul can't communicate through the brain in the way that it would like to. So does that seem like a good explanation, or what might be a problem with that one?
I don't know, my brain kind of goes to like the soul being synonymous with will, and then will being the sense of desire, which derives from like the sense of stimuli and then our prediction capabilities. And so like, again, like to be being reactionary, the will just seems to be physical, and therefore the soul is physical.
So that's
It's still a materialistic view, but like
that seems like a more
I don't feel like the soul being
a
immaterial.
Nietzschean view of the soul, or like maybe I guess I would say like it sounds like Schopenhauer, but Nietzsche borrowed a lot of stuff from Schopenhauer, but it's still like a materialist picture of the soul.
It sounds like a more tangible way to view soul and its relation to the body, because like even if it has to come through consciousness, like.
Well, why use the word? I mean, why use the word soul? Like this goes back to like the reductive materialist. Let's say, does a weatherman say Zeus is angry, hurling thunderbolts down from Mount Olympus? Right, Mount Hood maybe. I know, like he says, he talks in terms of like these impersonal forces. If you start talking about souls, people are going to like revert back to that primitive, superstitious nature of the immaterial substance. I suppose people can use words whatever way they want, and people make up words and force other people to use those words. And I suppose language is a living thing, but in philosophy, it's really important to I think be clear about terms. And so, for the purpose of this discussion, let's assume like the soul is an immaterial substance, and the question is, does the soul exist, or is the mind just the brain? So that's the mind-brain identity theory. The mind is the brain. Oh, here's a tip on the first midterm exam that'll open on Thursday. I'll have definitions. I'll ask you about definitions. For example, the mind-brain identity theory. So the mind-brain identity theory says, I'm not sure I can't remember what letter it is, but you'll see, answer C, say, that the mind is the brain. And you think, wait a minute, the mind-brain identity theory says the mind and the brain, that's too simple. But that's the answer, right? That's why it's called the mind-brain identity theory. So there will be certain questions that'll be really straightforward and just be about definitions. And that's one that I get. I'm surprised how many students miss that one, but I think they think it's too simple. But the mind-brain identity theory just says the mind is the brain, and there is no soul. That consciousness is a emergent property of the brain. Let's see.
Question, do thoughts have mass?
That's a good question. Like, what is a thought? So I think, like, the mind-brain identity theory would say a thought is just a pattern in your brain. Like, it's a sequential firing of neurons.
So it has mass.
Yeah, I don't think it would have mass just because
So then thoughts
it's
are
still
the
like
soul.
electrons in your brain firing. You know,
So
it's
then the
electricity, and
soul.
electricity doesn't have any mass.
So soul
Do
is
electrons have mass?
thoughts,
No.
and
They're
therefore like
massless.
thoughts is a thought is an immaterial substance that we have. So that sounds like it's a good correlation for the soul. Which again brings me back to a materialist argument.
So I mean, there aren't. So it's kind of difficult because
We're reactionary creatures that act in a proactive desire, but we're still reactionary.
electrons are still a material phenomenon, right? They're part of electromagnetism, which is one of the four forces. So it's a force.
But maybe it creates the soul, which we interpret as thought. Because I mean, what else is the soul inside of us but what we think and feel? That what we think, which causes our desires, which is like compels us, the soul compelling us to feel this way or do that, which is kind of what our thoughts do. So like, it sounds like our soul and thoughts are synonymous here. Which
Yeah, well, like the thoughts occur in the soul. Say, I mean, that's the material. The dualist argument is thoughts occur in the soul, and that they're different from the brain.
Your brain makes potential energy, and your body makes kinetic energy. Your thoughts are potential.
Yeah, your thoughts are, so this is the weird thing you think about, do your thoughts have mass? This is Descartes' question, right? He says, look, it's conceptually different. If I'm thinking about some abstract concept, like the concept of thought, say, or the concept of justice, are you saying that has mass, that I can look at it and like on like an encephalogram, right? And like, oh, that's what concept of justice looks like. And actually, there are brain states that are associated with particular thoughts. And now they're actually getting really good at figuring out these things. And even to the point where they're they're like imaging people's brains while they're dreaming, and they can come up with a picture of what you're seeing in your dream. How freaky is that, right? So they can actually see, like, this is what you're acting, because your visual cortex is active and it's seeing stuff. Right, so they can see what you're seeing in your mind, but they would say, "Look, this is just an image in your visual cortex, along with like a bunch of other stuff that the rest of your brain is doing for interpreting it and how you feel about it." Right, so maybe there's something like this, like a horrible tentacled monster, right? Out of H.P. Lovecraft, and then there's maybe the feeling of fear, and they'd see your amygdala is lighting up, and maybe there's this as all sorts of associations and memories, and they see other parts of your brain that are lighting up, and they're like, okay, this is like H.P. Lovecraft Cthulhu Nightmare, right? And they can actually understand what it is in your brain. Well, does your soul dream? It's a state of consciousness, right? But is your soul having a dream? I mean, dreaming is something that mammals do. Other animals don't do it, and it's a thing that the mammalian brain does most of the theories say it's to process information. The most current theories about dreaming is it's sort of like a dry run to both process and catalog and solidify long-term memories, and also to sort of like do practice runs for what might happen based on your experience.
So did you say only humans or mammals?
Yeah, only mammals dream. Other animals dream, like you see your cat,
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah.
dogs, right? And then there's one, what is it? There's an amphibian that dreams. I think it's a really primitive one. I think the spiny anteater dreams. And that's like as far down the food chain you go. Reptiles don't dream. Insects don't dream. I don't know about. I think birds do dream, but don't quote me on that. Actually, some animals. I think ducks will do this thing. Well, sometimes they'll like sleep with one eye open, and half their brain will be asleep while the other half will be awake, and it's sort of a weird thing.
And dolphins do that.
Yeah,
they don't
dolphins.
drown.
Right? Yeah. So, but it's a neurological phenomena. It's not, but it's consciousness, right? So then the same thing's true of waking consciousness. There's perception based on like input into your eyes and ears, your sense organs, and then your brain processes that information. Why bring in like this ethereal substance that kind of follows your body around wherever it goes and floats around it and is really what's doing the work, if you can explain it in terms of neurobiology? That's the challenge of the materialist. And I think that what the dualist has to come back with is this sort of idea that, well, okay, there's a neurological picture, but then there's the soul, and the soul is something you can't get rid of for some reason, and they'd state some reason, like the soul, we can't junk the idea of the soul, and so if you believe in a soul, it's really all the stuff about the nervous system, that's just interface talk, and then there's the question about like where this is all really happening, which is in the soul, which is different from the brain. But it makes things overly complicated. And this goes back to Occam's razor, which will be another thing that'll be on the exam. So Occam's razor, William of Occam, came up with this principle, which is don't multiply entities beyond necessity. Don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So if you're going to have a theory, you want to have your theoretical entities be as few as possible. And another way of this is put is that all of the things being equal, the simplest explanation is the best and the one most likely to be true. So, and the all the other things being equal is important. So you look at like maybe the idea that the Earth is stationary and all the planets and the sun revolve around it. It sounds simpler, right? But then you get some data that shows that you watch a planet going across the sky, and instead of going a straight arc, it's kind of doing this weird squiggly thing. And that the better you get your observations, at first it looks like it's going across and doubles back and then keeps going in the same direction. You're like, that's kind of weird. And then you get better and better observations, and actually looks like, no, it's not quite doing that. It's doing this like really weird movement. You're like, why is that? And if you posit that the Earth spins on its axis and moves around the sun, that's a better explanation, given the observations, right? So now that you see this, what's called retrograde motion of the planets, there's two things you can do. You can junk your idea that the Earth is stationary and the planets and the sun revolve around it, or you can hold on to it and try to fix it, right? And so this is what people, after Galileo, they tried to fix it. Why? Because the church said that the Earth was stationary, and there's some stuff in the Bible that seems to imply that the sun moves and the Earth is stationary. So we talked about this a couple of times ago. There's this idea of epicycles, that instead of thinking about, so you could still have the Earth stationary, and you could still have the planets going around it, but they would have these really weird orbits where they're sort of like doing this whirligig thing where they're going around like this. So that's kind of weird. And then that didn't really work with the observations. So you had to go like, they call these epicycles. So you have this sort of an orbit within an orbit. And then to make them fit the observations, they had to have an orbit within an orbit within an orbit. And at a certain point, the little fixes you have to do to fit the data are so crazy that people said, look, this doesn't work. And also, like, if you think the Earth is tilted on its axis, that's actually going to explain why the seasons happen the way they do. So you get a benefit there, too. So the simplest explanation is that the sun revolves around the Earth, spinning on its axis. So that's the one we ended up going with, because even though you can always patch up an old theory to fit the observations, right? But it has a kind of a weird ad hoc quality to it, right? So suppose someone has some like wacky conspiracy theory. The Jews control the media, right? So you think, okay, well, what about like Rupert Murdoch? He owns, News Corp and Fox News, and he's not a Jew. He's like an Australian, right? And he's not Jewish at all, as far as I know. Like, oh, they need a few Gentile puppets so people won't be wise to their conspiracy, right? Or something, right? Or they'd say, okay, well, the liberal media is controlled by Jews. but the conservatives are controlled by the Illuminati, right, or whatever, right? So there's always a way to patch up your wacky theory to make it fit the facts. But if you try to patch up the little holes, it has sort of you need to have a reason for the reinterpretation. And in the same way, this idea of the soul, even though it looks like everything we know about the brain and neurology makes it look like consciousness comes from the brain, we really want to hold on to this idea of the soul. And so we'll look for some little fixes. Oh, well, it's just the brain is a mirror interface for the soul. And that's why you get these changes in cognition. But then the question is, what independent evidence do you have for the soul? Like, why do you want to hold on to that idea? And it seems like all you can really get at is this weirdness between identifying a thought with a brain state. So it's true there's this correlation between a thought and a brain state, but it's hard to wrap your mind around the idea that a thought has weight or a thought is just an electrical pattern. Is the concept of justice a firing in the wirings of your brain? Or like, is it, a feeling of love, is love just a chemical reaction? Is a person just like a lump of 2.5 pounds of gray matter in a skull that's fueled by oxygen and nutrients coming from your body? Are you basically just like a meat puppet? Or are you like an embodied soul made in the image of God or something like that? I have thoughts on that.
I think we look better than God does, though.
You think what?
I think we look a little bit better than God.
Okay, so we're good. We've passed but we've surpassed God.
We've surpassed God. By a few centuries, maybe a millennium by now.
So, and we'll actually get to arguments for and against the existence of God. Because you believe in God doesn't necessarily mean you believe in souls. So I think the ancient Hebrews didn't really develop the idea of the soul until much later. They got conquered by they got conquered by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians got conquered by the Persians. And the Persians had this religion called Zoroastrianism, which included the idea of the soul. And it looks like the Hebrews sort of picked that up for them. And then later on, like the Greeks really had a strong concept of the soul, and they might have also, like, if they might have originally got it from the Zoroastrians, and then the Greeks, who conquered the Persians, they got a stronger belief in the soul.
Sounds like a fear of death, fear of nihilism.
So there's this question about, like, why do people believe in souls? If the soul doesn't really do anything, why do people hold on to this view? I'm always wary of like psychological explanations for beliefs, because you always want to look at the evidence, right? But given that if there's an absence of evidence, then maybe you jump back to the psychology question, right? So what you want to avoid doing is saying, like you're talking about an issue and you say, you only believe that because, I don't know.
Well, I mean, like creatures tend to like resist change through time, or like adapt to struggle over time. So like it would only be natural that like we are faced with a timeless sense, like we still want to continue what our life has been, and so like we want to continue past this next state of change because that's what we're used to, like just what we've done our entire lives. So why would we stop? We don't really want to put an end to that.
Sure, you have like an instinct for survival. You want to live as long as you can. Even though people will say things like, "Oh, well, I don't want to live forever," but maybe it's because you don't want to face the fact that of your own mortality or your own mortality or something.
Would it be possible to live forever and end up like Bertrand Russell said, like basically a soup of X-ray radiation?
It's a good
universe.
It's a good question. We'll get to that when we talk about cryonics and life after death. I think next week. The question is like, if you could be personally immortal in the physical sense, then
You succumb to heat death.
what are you gonna do about the heat death of the universe? Yeah, that could be a problem. But you know, you got like maybe 100 billion years to, I mean, you got a long time to do it. You got 100 billion years to figure it out, right?
Fair enough.
And you know, science, modern science, like really, like the science, yeah, I don't know, it's depending on where you can. If you go back to Francis Bacon, maybe you got 400 years. But really, like modern science and technology, maybe go back to the Industrial Revolution, 150 years of just starting to figure some of this stuff out. Okay, let's see. Anything else on this? The dualist, I think it can always hold on to the idea of the soul and to say these are just effects of the brain that in turn affect the soul. But it seems like it's a violation of Occam's razor, and that the explanation is ad hoc. And unless you have some independent reason for believing the soul, that you should give it up.
Yeah, but does nature hold the Occam's razor?
It seems that it does. Like, I mean, well, I should say science does. It's a philosophical principle, or if you more broadly speaking, or more narrowly speaking, a scientific principle.
Given Darwinianism, though, like it tends to branch out with all the excess, and then eventually the process of elimination to Occam's razor. But initially, it doesn't start off with Occam's razor. Like,
So there's a difference between variation and like explanation. So Occam's razor deals with explanation. So the idea is that you're looking for a theory to explain things, and like say evolution, right? So we can come up with a theory that God created the world out of nothing, and created living things after their kind, and God created all the different kinds of things that we see around. Or there's the theory of evolution, that life started from a prebiotic soup, and through random mutation and natural selection, we see all the varieties of things we have today through evolutionary process, right? And so Occam's razor, you want to look at those two explanations and ask like which is simplest. That would be one criteria for which is again, all other things being equal. So, but you want to look at those two explanations. And the question is like, what's the data, and then what's the simplest explanation that fits the data? That'd be the question that Occam would ask. And that's as far as explanation goes. It doesn't say that always that's the most important thing that matters, but it says, suppose you have two theories which seem to fit the data, and they both look close. That the question is, and they're both consistent with the data. The question is, which one do you favor? And the idea is that one criteria is you go with the simplest explanation, and you don't posit a theoretical mechanism that you don't have independent reason for believing exists.
Would it be wrong to question Occam that like at the genesis point of that piece of information was that like the correct assumption to use to base things by? Because like empirically, like you have to begin empirically using Occam's razor to test it out versus like empirically using the information to those two former statements that he would analyze. So it's like, could we like turn this question on him in the beginning of the genesis of the question?
I'm not sure. Like what? Like is Occam's razor the simplest way of approaching philosophical explanation?
Is the simplest, the correct like method?
Yeah, I mean you can question that. It seems like that's a principle that's used in science, and there's this weird thing in science where any number of theories is consistent with the data. But then the question is, because you can always patch up your theory in weird ways to make it work. And it's hard to describe this without going into like intricate detail about some like theory. And you get this a lot in like the social sciences, where you get these weird cases and you're like, so you have this theory and then you have all these things that contradict your theory. So, and what people often do is they look out for all the things that contradict their theory, and they say, well, here's like some particular explanation why that thing didn't follow my general theory. And so the problem is you have all these variant cases where like where the theory doesn't fit the data, and you try to come up with some like particular small explanation for that's why it didn't work there, that's why it didn't work there, that's why it didn't work there. And at a certain point, it's like an old leaky boat with a bunch of patches all over it, and it starts to look like a really crappy theory that's really not explaining the thing you're trying to explain because there are all these exceptions. And that's why Occam's razor says, look, your theory should be clean and simple and clear and explain all the cases in a good way. Maybe there might be a few hard cases, but it should explain everything and be simple and precise and not have a lot of complicated, overly complicated theory to explain a set of data. And so if you get some really weird, you know what a Rube Goldberg machine is? It's sort of like, maybe I'll call that up after the break here. I'll show you a Rube Goldberg machine. You don't want your theory to look like a Rube Goldberg machine.
It's a very simple thing.
Yeah, it's a machine that does a really simple thing like drop a trap on a mouse, but it's got all these complicated ways of doing that. So the idea is don't make your theory like that. All right, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back and talk some more about the mind-body problem.
Are you gonna touch John Lock it up?
I think personal identity is next. Okay, so we're going to cover chapter 3 on Thursday. So we're going to finish up the mind-body problem today. And oops, let me see if I can get the student view here. Moodle with more and more features. I'm like, where did they hide that thing this time around? Maybe I'll just have to put up with the, oops, that wasn't the right button to press. I might just have to put up with the instructor view here. Navigation. Every time they update this, they move stuff around. I'm like, oh, where's that thing that I used to use? Maybe I can do this. Maybe move it up here. Switch role. Here we go. Okay, that's better. So we're in week 3. So I have a practice exam, which has, I think, how many questions? Did I just put 5 here?
I think you shortened them.
Yeah, I think I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll stick another 5 up there. And some of these questions may actually appear on the exam. So before you take the exam, you should take these. Take these from home. You have to take the exam in the testing lab. It'll open right after class on Thursday. And you'll have till, I think, actually it says right here, if you click on the exam, it'll tell you what dates the exam is.
Wait, did you finally fix the quizzes so it actually like tells you which ones you got wrong and what the answer was now?
Yep, I did.
Thank God.
It's like work with the testing lab. It's a pain to have students have to come to my office, and so we get that fixed. So you'll actually have till the following Thursday, February 1st, to finish the exam. All right, so let's talk about artificial intelligence, I guess, is one. And before that, there's something related to that, which is this idea of functionalism. So functionalism is another solution to the mind-body problem. And the idea is that that the material doesn't matter, that it's the function that matters. So that, I don't want green. Must be Mark Harris that he likes the green. I don't know who else is in here. Somebody's in here that really likes the green. Okay. Sorry about that. This always happens. I just made it. Why is it small? Sorry about this. Okay. Oh. I need how do I get my board back? Where's my bar?
God, why does it just disappear so randomly?
Like I touched something. These things are totally not helpful.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what this is. I'm afraid to click something now. I'm like, what does that do? It's not really doing anything. This will control the size of my thing here.
I just restarted. Or open your task manager and go to like end process.
That's a good
End
idea.
process.
I'm just
Sometimes
gonna
that
close it
resets
up. Sorry
everything.
about this.
It's control delete.
See if I can just do that. Okay. So for preparing for the exam, just while I do this, try to multitask here. So so I have the quiz up there. I'll put some more questions up there, and then think about like, so there are questions at the end of each section of the text, so look those over, look over your class notes, look over the PowerPoints. And you also get a 3x5 card front and back for the test, so remember to utilize that, because the difficulty of the test assumes that you get that. It's sort of a security blanket. Put whatever you think is helpful in there, front and back, small font, whatever. Oh, look, there it is. Okay. See if I can move it without making it disappear.
There might be like a key binding to open that up specifically, and
Yeah, I might need to do
something like that.
a little research.
Bottom right.
Okay. And actually, I'd like to, you know I can collapse it like this, that's helpful.
Yeah, the settings.
I'm not gonna change that now, but I was just trying to make this thing a little smaller. Okay. So, functionalism. So functionalism says that a mind is any process. So a mind is any material that is so structured as to perform certain complex operations. And so the idea is it's the complex operations that matter. It doesn't matter what it's made out of. So the idea is that functionalism says that this dualism versus materialism thing doesn't really speak to the question of consciousness and what consciousness is. If there are souls that, as long as they perform certain complex operations, we would call them minds. If there's, like, say, a non-human animal and that can perform the same complex operations, we'd say that the animal has a mind. If an alien from another world came and seems to have states of consciousness based on their behavior or common physiology with humans, they would have a mind. If there are ghosts could have minds. And then even a computer which can do the same things that humans do, perform the same complex operations that we call thought or belief or problem solving or memories or even attitudes. Feelings might pose a special problem, but at least attitudes and beliefs, we'd say, well, that computer has a mind too. And so functionalism is typically the go-to view for people that believe in artificial intelligence. And they'd say, it's not the fact that it's a biological brain, it's the fact that you have this neural network that performs these complex operations, and that consciousness is an emergent property of those operations. If you could do the same thing in an artificial neural network, you would also get consciousness. And so this fits in with this theory called the Turing test.
Isn't this something like based off like how conscious something is?
Yeah, so it's a test about whether or not there's an artificial intelligence, whether artificial intelligence is possible. So the idea is that how would you know when a machine was conscious? And Alfred Turing set up this test where this sort of primitive interface where a person would speak into a microphone and then a typewriter would type out words. So you'd like talk to the computer. And so you have like a back and forth conversation, and the computer was set up. I think you would type something and then the computer would type something back. So it's like a modern chat program, right? Yeah. And then anybody here get into a conversation or maybe an argument with a chat bot, and then like in the middle of the conversation you realize, oh, this isn't really a person, this is just like a computer program. Kind of embarrassing, right? So you just imagine like so the Turing test is like this. The idea is that the computer is programmed to give you certain outputs for certain inputs. So, and the idea is that the Turing test says that at the point where you can't tell the difference between a human being and the machine, you have to say the machine is conscious. So it's just something like, I don't know, it's based on what's sometimes called black box behaviorism, which says that you really don't need to know the mechanism of consciousness. You just look at inputs and outputs. You look at people's behavior. So you get stimulus, and then there's a response. Why the response happens the way it does is not relevant. And what's going on inside your mind, your subconscious, and all that Freudian stuff, the behaviors say doesn't matter. It just matters what you do. And people do different things based on different stimuli or different conditions. And so in the same way, they'd say, look, if you have a conversation with the machine and the machine responds in all ways it seems to be meaningful, and you can't tell the difference between the machine and the human being, you have to say that the machine is conscious. So that's like the criteria for genuine artificial intelligence. Oops. This is the.
That seems wrong to me. I don't know
Why?
Because I feel like that's how a dualist thinks to a materialist. The dualist thinks that the consciousness is much more special than the material world producing it. But like when you get into programming and stuff like AI, for some reason when they have consciousness, it doesn't seem possible to some.
Well, I take it the other way. Like, why would you deny consciousness? Like, if I can't tell the difference between a computer program and a person, what would justify me in saying, well, okay, people, that's a real person, that's a fake person, that's just an imitation, or that's just a simulation of a person, but it's not a real person?
Would it be based off intention? Knowing the intention of what you're speaking to?
Yeah, so that's actually, I think, a good answer, and that's essentially like John Searle's answer. So John Searle has this thing called the Chinese room argument, and it's based on this sort of idea of like intention, which is like a private, subjective thing. So it's the Chinese room argument, and let's see if I can get a smaller. I want a smaller line. That didn't work. Let's try this. So anybody remember the Chinese art room argument? Tell me how it goes. Hallelujah. The smaller one.
Yeah, that's way better.
Okay, I can actually write with this. Now I know that like as soon as I come back on Thursday, I'll have to monkey around with this before class because it'll all just be changed back to the way it was before. And I'm probably annoying whoever uses this and likes the big fat lines that are green. I'm probably annoying them as well. Okay, so the Chinese room argument. So you have like, there's a room. Oh, hell. Where did my thing go? Like you hide it, there should be like a little thing down here. I got the I'm still in the eraser. See what that does. That didn't help.
Oh no.
I have to do a tutorial after class here. I just wanted to change the size of my line here. I don't have to close this up again. Where's the little like minimize thing?
It's at the top right. Yeah, it's the third
I
one.
can do that.
Yeah.
But then where's my little menu bar?
Press escape on the keyboard.
Oh, good idea.
No, nothing.
No.
Try.
Kibitz. That's not it.
Try make a new page, maybe.
That's in the menu though. These are just like little
don't know.
This just controls like how big my cursor is. This is a drag. Okay, something happened. Oh, that's just,
Yeah, see, I thought if you make a new page, it would reset it, but
can't draw with the eraser. But I can't remember what I did before.
you had to restart it.
I'll go back and look at the video.
It's nonsense.
Actually, I can save it. This is a completely useful use time, isn't it? And it will only let me do it that way too. Okay. Third time's a charm.
Do you ever,
Okay, that is fascinating. We'll fix it in post. Oh, here it is. Now, why wasn't it there before?
yeah, that's really
Okay. So the Chinese room. And this thing used to sort of hang around when I click this thing. I'm not going to click it again now. So you have this room. And there's a guy in a room. And then there's a door on either side. There's a place where you can slip a piece of paper. I guess there's a door where the guy can get out if he wants. So he's in there, and he's sitting at a desk. And then a piece of paper goes in under the door, and he translates it. So he's got the input, the piece of paper, and it's got some characters written on it. And then he's got his translation dictionary that says whenever you see this string of characters, write this string of characters. So the idea is he's translating from, this is Chinese, and this is something like some other language he doesn't know, like say maybe Arabic or something. And then he's got his, let's put this here, translation manual. And then once he's done, he sends out the output. So I wasn't an art major. It's good philosophy. So, so you have like this is the input in Chinese. So you have there's document written there, and then there's he does the translation. Now he doesn't know either of these languages. He doesn't know Chinese, doesn't know Arabic, right? So he's translating from Chinese to Arabic, and so he's just got these rules to say whenever you see this character or this word, and you don't even know what the characters mean, right? He just translates them based on this manual. Whenever you see this, write this. Whenever you see this, write this. And then he puts out the translation. He can do the translation. What is he doing? He's just manipulating symbols. He has no idea what he's doing. He has no idea the meaning of the words that he's translating. So what's this example supposed to show?
he's a computer.
Yeah, he's basically a computer, right? Right, so he doesn't know what he's doing. In the same way, a computer is just taking input and converting it to output, but it doesn't have any consciousness of what it's doing. It's not aware of what it's doing. And so what Searle says is you have to have a biological brain in order to have consciousness. That a machine intelligence, so-called, can only know syntax. It can't know semantics.
Yeah, but then what if he did know about the world around him and he did have a reason for doing it?
Well,
He probably wouldn't do as good a job, maybe.
Well, this is an analogy, and what Searle says is that you need a brain for awareness of semantics or meaning, right? Semantics has to do with the meaning of words. And the meaning of words, you have to have experiences of certain kinds.
Oh, I see.
Like you have to have sensory experiences. You have to you have visual sensations or auditory, tactile sensations. And then you have to like put those experiences together. And you also to have like, associations, you have to be able to experience pleasure and pain in order to like or dislike certain things. You have to be able, and then there's like emotions, which is another entire thing about the feeling of happiness or frustration or desire. How could a computer have those things? So his argument is that you really need a biological brain in order to have consciousness, that machine intelligence can only be a simulation. So what do you think about this argument by analogy? Any thoughts about it? Any questions about like what it means, right? So the guy in the room, the Chinese room, is analogous to a computer. He's like, if you want to get particular about it, he's like the processing, or he's the processing unit, and maybe the like the translation manual is the program that he's operating under, and then this is the input, is the document comes under the door, and then the one he creates and puts out the other side is the output, right? So
what if you like allowed a computer, like AI, that was doing things like he's doing, but you gave him the information of what exactly he's doing and what it means to us?
The question is, how would you do that, though? Like how?
I guess it would come down to the basis of like, why do we have feelings about words? Like, if we say raw, I feel like you'd have to give an image for every word that the computer is capable of reading or knowing. But then you'd also have to put an emotional feeling too. Like, if you say rock, I picture rock, but then I can also associate like other things that rocks can do, like rocks break apart, like.
Well, I mean, like I can have I have a photo library in my computer, but my computer doesn't, doesn't know what the pictures are about, and I could write in description against underneath all the photos about what they're about, but my computer doesn't understand what those words mean. It just collects the characters and it's just ones and zeros ultimately. There's no awareness there. So it's like there's this program, one of the first artificial intelligence that came about. It's called ELIZA. So and you can I think you can still talk to ELIZA online. Just Google it, or use DuckDuckGo.
That thing turned on and then that started making sound or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on.
So that was weird.
Yeah. Anyway, so you search for Eliza and you'd say, hello, and Eliza will say, hello, how are you doing today, or something. And then you say, or I think Eliza starts out by saying, hello, how are you, and ask what's bothering you, right? So, and then you might say, I'm upset about my mother, right? And they'd say, oh, what happened with your mother? And Eliza says, well, what happened with your mother? And you say, my mother never understands me. And then you say, and then Eliza will say, well, why doesn't your mother understand you, right? Some people get paid $200 an hour for this. So it seems like there's an opportunity here. There's actually, there's an Eliza-like thing with in THX 1138, which is George Lucas's first movie. Student film turned into a decent production, and there's a giant picture of Jesus, and there's this voice that comes out and basically spits out a question based on what you said. What's troubling you, son? And you talk to it, and they say, how does that make you feel, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea is that there's no, the artificial intelligence has no conception of what the words you're saying means. It's just got these syntactical rules that spit back the input you give it in terms of output, and just turn your statement into a question, or it determines through some algorithm what you're asking it, and then answers the question with a question.
Well, what about imagination? Would you still relate that to only?
That's a good question about whether they have algorithms that will sort of spit out random things. There's computers that make poetry.
Yeah.
But they just, again, it's just an algorithm, right? So
but are we any different from that?
That's a good question. I think that's the question, right? How are we different from a computer and stimulus response, input output?
Maybe we just have one extra input, and that's the chemicals that are blowing up in our brains every second.
There was this question about qualia. So qualia is this idea of first-person experience. It's the feeling that you have when you sort of peer inside your mind. And when you actually have an experience, and when you have an experience, whether it's a physical experience, like a tactile experience, or a sensory experience where you see a color, or where you feel a sensation. And it seems like that qualia it's different from, like in a machine, how could a machine ever have an experience? Like it might register something on a sensor, but it's not really having an experience.
That's what we do.
Like if you have you have a camera, right? So I'm gonna make my robot, I'm gonna put like sensors, I'm gonna put cameras in it. But I'm gonna program my robot to like walk around the room and look at stuff. But the robot's not really looking at stuff if all it has is like a camera and some program that makes it walk around in a predetermined pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It's just registering and recording things. But it's not really conscious of what it's seeing.
When it does record, it's not like picking out certain objects it sees and then creating interest for that object. It's just seeing.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and it's not even really seeing though, because there's no awareness. It's just like recording things, right? It's detecting things.
Yeah.
So there's this difference between, say, recording, detecting, maybe even processing information, right? Like your computer will process information. Recording, detecting, processing, versus thinking, actual thinking, awareness, and definitely feeling or sensing. And the argument is never, that the twain shall meet, that these are features of biological organisms, and a non-living, intelligence, so-called, can never be the same, because they're the basis of consciousness is biological, and that at most all you can do is simulate. You can never reproduce.
Do you think the reason that robots don't prioritize things the way that we do is because when a robot is first created, or let's say you create a robot that surveys areas, camera, moving around, maybe it can't necessarily have a personality to what it's seeing because it can't feel anything to what it's seeing. So like it doesn't know danger it doesn't know danger or safe. It just knows I'm here. But for a human, like let's say I'm walking and I'm a toddler and I walk right into this pole, I'm gonna remember, that didn't make my head feel too good. I don't feel too happy about that situation. What I saw, I don't want to see that close again.
Yeah.
and
and so that's part, like the learning process is the pleasure of pain principle.
Yeah, but how would you give that to a robot?
That's a good question.
Mess up its code every time it does something.
Now there are robots they designed to try to learn, so it will.
Those are like neural networks, right?
Right. So the idea is that you got sort of a self-adjusting program which goes through trial and error, like human beings, and then there's no like pain stimulus to try to reinforce behavior. But the idea is that whenever it fails at a task, you program it to make an adjustment, to try something else, or to sort of catalog that and adjust the behavior based on
that's what
success or
Google's
failure.
AI just did. It's auto AI, I think is what it's called. And it's this type of AI that it makes AI, but every time it makes an AI algorithm, like neural network based, it'll run it through a human, right? And so they'll check it out, and whatever they don't like, they'll let the program know, hey, we don't like this characteristic, get rid of it. And so it makes it 1,000 different times, and it kind of figures out exactly what we're looking for. But it made an AI that was like more efficient than anyone has ever made before.
Yeah, I mean, computers definitely have their there are benefits in processing mass amounts of information, or even approaching problems in novel ways and efficient ways that just by sheer processing power that human beings might have problems with. But the question you asked earlier, which is like, how is this any different from a human? Apart from the qualia, you think, well, you think about like a brain. What's your brain made of? Is this neural network? So maybe the question is like, why? Here's your brain. It's got all these neurons. Well, could we like reproduce this with parallel processors or something?
They do have organic computers.
Mm-hmm.
They're at least working on organic computers.
Yep.
And then the question is that organic? Is that like, are you just creating organic life, or is that like a?
It was more like based
computer?
off the chemical reactions in a biocomputer. So I think what they were doing is they were using like cells to.
And
It's
that-
complicated.
That would fit like Searle's idea that you need biological matter in some capacity. But what if you could just simulate the function? Again, it's the function that matters. So you look at how a brain operates, you understand, you sort of, abstract principles from analyzing the brain. And then you apply those to making your neural network. Because if consciousness is just this pattern of electrons in your brain, it seems that we have a complex enough series of processors that does the same thing that your brain does, that it would have an emergent property too. Because you look at what your brain is, like what is this made of? Like it's just individual synapses, right? And it's like neurons, and there's synapses, and the electrons like travel in certain patterns. Well, we can analyze like how that works, and then just create an imitation based on silicon chips. It seems like it would have that emergent property of consciousness too, if it's just the electrons and the pattern they're arranged in. And now, it wouldn't necessarily have to be exactly like this. Let me see if I can find, so you had this idea in rudimentary flight where you had, the first attempts at flight were really hit and miss, right? So, here we go. Oops. Flight. I'll just, I think this is one of these two.
I'm just amazed that they had clips of it.
Here.
Somehow made its way to YouTube.
So look at this, right? They're trying to, like the flapping wings. They're going for the flapping wings. Here's something that's a little more sort of artificial, but it's definitely not working. But it's trying to go with like the flapping motion. Here's something that's sort of, I think this is, looks like a bird, right? Look at the wings here. They're trying to flap up and down. So what they're trying to do here is exactly mimic how birds fly.
Yeah.
Here's a helicopter, and this is based more on sort of, you watch like little, yeah, so that one. So I don't think I've seen this particular one. But you look at the ones of the artificial flight. Now here you get this sort of the first airplane.
Yeah,
you get the
those-
fixed wing aircraft, right?
Solid track.
Now, do birds ever fly like that? He's like a jetpack.
Mhm.
This guy's gonna blow up. So now here you're getting people are trying to work on the aerodynamics, and that. I actually didn't want the jetpack. And there's even like people that I think this is the one
It's the same one.
Oops. Oh, it is the same one. Here's a guy that's got like bird's wings. Oh, see? So here's with the Charlie Chaplin music. So again, you see the flapping wings, and it just didn't work. And then you got these, and you notice that people try all these different variations, And here's the flapping one. And so it's not really working. And here's another one where the wings go up and down. And so the idea is that after a while, the Wright brothers decided that instead of trying to imitate nature, what you should do is try to abstract the principles of aerodynamics. Figure out what it is that makes a bird fly. And here they're getting a little closer, right? You try to figure out what it is that makes a bird fly, and then understand those principles, and then make something similar but not exactly the same. I'm not sure what they're thinking here, but that's not going to work. So, but here you can see there's no animal in nature that looks like this, that flies like that. But they're trying to abstract the principles. Here's, there's a guy that looks like he's his ornithopter. I think this is another flapping wings thing, as I recall.
A Orthingopter is, I think, it's like a plane that flaps instead of a propeller.
Okay. Get on with the experiment, buddy.
I mean, we kind of have that now in drone form.
There are actually planes that fly.
Oh, there he
Really?
goes.
Yeah.
That's not going to work very well. So you think you test that out before you get in front of the cameras there? That's a fail. So you get the idea, right? So, and here's somebody with a more like different kind of design. So the idea is that you have you don't want to exactly imitate nature, but what you want to do is, oops, I just want to close this. What you want to do is try to abstract the principles of aerodynamics, and then create artificial flight based on an understanding of those principles. So you have like in a fixed wing aircraft, you have the little flaps that give you lift. And that's similar to watching, like you'd see an eagle, and you understand, they move it, when they're soaring, they move their wings a little bit, it helps them navigate and go up and follow the air currents. And so there's no animal in nature with propeller, but we understand like what gives this an artificial way of pulling the plane forward, and you get the jet engine. It's an improvement on that. So that's what the best artificial intelligence is trying to do this, and so you have principles of machine learning. And building up these networks from bottom up, trying to understand the principles of cognition and then apply those to an artificial intelligence. And why wouldn't you get intelligence or consciousness if you have a complex enough network which
Well, you said materials didn't matter. It was about the algorithm.
That's a function. That's a functional.
Yeah, the function.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe there is something to the complexity of the human body that does produce different thought, of course, than a computer. Or maybe even if they made like an AI on a quantum computer, then how would it react? Then what would it be capable of doing?
Yeah, and there are theories of consciousness that consciousness comes from like the microtubules of the brain, which exist at a quantum level, and so and Roger Penrose has this quantum theory of quantum consciousness that your brain is this form of current quantum energy, and so that's the case. You get a quantum computer, maybe you could have artificial intelligence.
See, I could agree with that because, they explained also so they thought neurons went in one direction, right? So if a current was moving in this direction, it would pass it on to the next one. But they learned that that's not how it works. It depends on how much energy from it was really complex. It was more based on like what part of the neuron it hit and what velocity of like what power it hit it at. And that would actually dictate on which direction it decided to send that synapse back. So sometimes it could send it back, or sometimes it would send it forward. And so that was completely different than what we thought for like 100 years or so.
Yeah, so it might be that the networks are more complex, and we want to build that into our model.
Yeah.
And we'd also want to include, and this is a big part of learning, is having feedback mechanisms. So you get like all these little adjustments, like when you're learning how to, you get a kid learning how to walk or how to talk. they make all these errors, and then they make little adjustments based on feedback they get until they get things just right. And so they've done this with robots, like the Boston Dynamics robot dogs. And maybe I'll just call those up quickly. So you have artificial animals that can get robots that will move in certain ways. Based again on actual animals close to nature, but with artificial parts. Let me see if I can. Good. Why aren't videos showing up in the first list here? Let's. This actually shows the evolution of the robot dogs, where you can see the differences.
Yeah, this one's the newest one.
So these are the new ones, and they've come actually a long ways from this.
Yeah.
So this is the one I remember seeing the first time in 2009. They make a lot of racket. So you're going up a hill.
Yeah. The military was gonna buy them, but they were too
So it
loud.
looks kind of like a horse. Watch one of the guy. There's a guy. See if they show the guy kicking one. There, watch this. See the way it adjusts, and when it's in slippery ground, it rights itself. That's all super complex feedback.
It's insane.
Making little adjustments in there's a complex program about what happens when you're in these different conditions that allows it to stay upright, even on like an icy surface like that. So pretty neat. This stuff is going to be commonplace in a few decades. You'll see these all around in your house,
Yeah.
walking down the street. And then at a certain point, you'll have like people like probably starting out with the disabled and the elderly with artificial bodies like this moving around.
They were talking
Instead of
about making
wheelchairs.
artificial intelligence, but it was like artificial intelligence that are counselors as well. So they can study exactly how you're feeling just by the subtle emotions that you have in your face, and then be able to dictate how to talk to you and help you through things.
Yes.
Counselor AI.
Yeah, and that it's sort of like a modified version of ELIZA. But I think that the argument there is that it's kind of like a tool. It's like a biofeedback mechanism. It's not understanding you. It's not relating to you as a person. And so it's going to have, I think the argument would be to have limited efficacy. And it's not the same as like an interpersonal relationship with a counselor. Although it might have its place and it might be cheaper, right? But it's still, you don't have that, and there's actually some forms of counseling where like the relationship and trust between counselor and the patient is super important in the person getting well again. But then the question is, could there be an artificial intelligence that would be as good as a counselor and would actually be able to express empathy?
I think if it had the same exact voice as a human, I think that could be an illusion that could be made.
So, but it would be an illusion, though, right?
Yeah, but I mean, what isn't an illusion?
Lots of things are illusions,
Yeah, I don't know.
but there's a difference between like a real person. Now, the Turing test, interestingly, says it doesn't matter. That if you can't tell the difference between a real counselor and a simulation, that you have no grounds to say the simulation is fake and not really conscious, but a person is. And this is a good question about asking like how. Okay, you say, well, the robot's not conscious. Well, how do you know the person next to you is conscious? How do you know they're just not operating on stimulus response? It might be that you have first-person experience, but they're just like they're just a human animal that just behaves according to this principle of stimulus response, but doesn't have any awareness of their own experiences.
But if the person being talking to the AI just isn't very observant,
I suppose you could ask bad questions, right? There's ways to try to trip up the AI. It's an interesting question because you only have access to your own experiences. You can't experience anybody else's experiences. Everything else is an inference. So how would we really know with the AI? We'll talk a little bit more about this in the personal identity.